Hi guys, I'm Greg Howlett, and I'm here again in my studio with a guest, Ted Howe. Ted, welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to be here again.
Ted is from LA. He's a recording artist and a concert pianist, but probably more importantly, at least for this segment, he's a teacher. And he's been teaching now for 4 decades. And he's learned a lot.
4 decades?
4 decades. Learned a lot in 4 decades. And I want to take a few minutes today and talk with Ted about how you can learn to play the piano better. We'll talk about what you've learned in 4 years of teaching, or 4 decades.
4 decades.
4 decades of teaching. Again, there's a big overlap, even from jazz to the styles that most of you are probably playing, especially church musicians. And I went to study jazz myself years ago because I started to see what I could learn, the holes that could be filled in my own playing from the study of jazz. And interestingly enough, I was influenced by Ted years before I ever met Ted. Because when I first started taking jazz piano lessons, I started studying with Kevin Bells, who was one of your students, a very successful pianist that plays in Atlanta. And I learned from Kevin for years and then eventually moved on to Ted. But before I moved to Ted, I was still learning Ted's system. And Ted's system originates at Berklee, which we covered in the last segment, Berklee School of Music. And Berklee was heavily influenced by a particular man named Joseph Schillinger, who was a great, he wrote a system about music where he basically made it very logical. Very mathematical. It's the kind of thing that most of you have never seen. It's not really taught anymore, but it's very valuable. You can go on Amazon and buy some of his stuff. It costs a fortune, but it's still out there available, out of print, but available on the used book market. But anyway, your system, which comes from that influence, is very, very helpful. It's very, very logical. It has helped me tremendously over the years in my church music. And so I want to talk today about maybe some aspects of that, and we'll start with something that may be a little off from that. But I'm just curious if you could talk about maybe, say, the 3 most important things that you end up steering musicians toward to focus on when they start coming to you. Now, assuming that they play well and they can read and do this stuff, what are important things that you see deficiencies in musicians and want to work with?
Okay. Well, the first thing would be if you're talking about they can already play the piano, they're already decent musicians, would be the ears, first of all.
Ear?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you're going to improvise, improvising isn't sitting and learning Oscar Peterson licks and playing them on your gig.
Right.
It's playing your own stuff. You study somebody's improvisations. You can play them, but you're really not supposed to go out and imitate something. You're supposed to be yourself.
Right. Yeah.
So to do that, you got to have something up in your head, and it's got to get out of here and get down to the fingertips.
Right.
It has to go through the ears. So ears are very, very important. Making sure that people can hear a major chord from a minor chord, if they're a little more advanced, can hear a sharp 9 chord from a flat 9 chord, and sometimes what I do with people, I'll just play a chord and ask them to sing something for me. Okay. Not to be in tune, just sing it. So that's the first thing is the ears. If you're going to be an improviser and you want to play jazz, you have to have good ears.
Got it.
Okay. The next thing would be their harmonic knowledge. What does that mean? That means, do they know how to negotiate through all these chord substitutions that people write? Can they write their own? Can they make up or compose their own tunes? All right. But the main thing is, can they get through the mirage of, when you buy all these new fake books that are out, of complicated chord progression, especially like Brad Meldau tunes and people of that, the guy we talked about yesterday who passed away, Mulgrew Miller.
Sure.
Very, very hard chord progression to get through. You've got to hear those too, but do they have the harmonic knowledge to actually produce the sound by voicings?
Voicing meaning?
Voicing mean taking a basic chord, it's a C7th, and let's say I want to play a C7th with a 1 as the top note of a chord. How many different ways can I play that chord?
Sure, a million.
Can you sit there and play me 10 ways of playing that? Well, that's important.
It's funny that you bring that up. That was one of those things, a topic that I didn't even know what voicing was until I started studying with Kevin all those years ago. Never understood the importance of not only just picking the right chord for a situation, but understanding how to position the notes in the chord.
Yeah. I like to call it distribute the notes.
Distribute the notes.
Yeah. And in arranging, we call it concerting the notes. If you write a voicing and you say, okay, concerting means assigning each note to whatever instrument you want to
right.
do. You say, which is very, very important to know how to do that, especially on the keyboard. Because when you listen to the great jazz pianists, more than their fast, improvisational lines, I can identify players by their harmonic identity long before, especially these days, because a lot of the younger players are repeating something like the older players.
Right.
But when you think someone like Bill Evans, the harmonic thing, the voice thing,
it's a voicing.
Yeah, and Brubeck, what Brubeck did, instantly those big, fat, huge, two-handed, 10-note voices he used to play. George Shearing with the block chords, et cetera, et cetera. They all have, even the newer guys like Chick, the newer guys, like my age, but Chick and Herbie and people like Brad Mehldau, they all still have their own harmonic identities. And they've done that by being able to play all the standard voicings that are around, which you need to know.
Right.
And then, like in computer language, manipulate the data. I'm not going to play it like this. It sounds too much like Oscar. You can start moving notes around. Well, that's one thing I teach.
Right.
Is a voicing system, which you
I've been through the voicing system. Yeah, it's honestly, it's a lot of work, and it's not necessarily fun work, but it absolutely will revolutionize your sound.
I think it's a lot.
No
of fun.
question. You do?
Oh,
playing through the circle?
Yeah.
Okay.
To drive my parents crazy. My dad would be watching TV upstairs and I hear boom, boom, boom. It's like he'd hear the same chords going over and over again through the circle.
Right. Yeah, go through the circle of fifths. When I say through the circle, I'm talking about the circle of fifths, but working on positioning notes in a chord correctly. Not such a big deal if you're playing triads, but once you move to 5 and 6 note chords, all of a sudden voicing becomes ultra important. So we mentioned your ear, we mentioned voicing. What else?
Getting a sound out of the piano.
Okay.
This is one thing a lot of jazz pianists miss, both local and even some of the great guys, is it's so linear oriented,
Right.
With the solos, your right hand really almost is like a horn player when you're taking a solo.
Yep.
And a lot of times pianists just forget that. I'm talking about touch, like when you hear someone like Horowitz play or Lang Lang, any of the great concert pianists, and they're playing something very simple, just a simple melody with the right hand, sometimes nothing with the left hand, with the part of a piano concerto or whatever, or just they're doing a solo piano, and you hear that piano and you go, my God, it sounds like it's being bowed or it's being sung or it's being blown through a horn. It just sounds so natural, because the piano was built to do that. Even though it's a percussion instrument, you have between you and when that hammer hits the string, you got all this mechanism in there called the action, and you can control all those things. And when you hear a lot of jazz pianists play ballads sometime, you go, oh my God.
It falls apart.
It sounds too percussive. It doesn't really fall apart. So developing a touch, because you can do the same thing. Herbie's got classic touch.
Right.
Keith Jarrett, my God, like good as any classical player. And the new guy, Brad Mehldau,
Sure.
So that's very important that you as a teacher, that you don't just feed everybody all the information, I can't wait to play a Dorian scale and play these big fat voice things. Yeah, but you have to learn to play them, and you have to learn to play the melodies that go along with them. And I have trouble getting people who want to do that sometimes. They just do not want to do it. And they pay you. Sometimes say, I didn't come here for that. I say, fine, we'll give you whatever you want, But to me, that's all about making music. It's like you're going to build your own voicing so you get your own sound. I'm kind of noted for that all the years when I lived in Boston and even here when I lived in Atlanta. And when you sit and play a solo piece, or you're playing with a band, you get a tone, you get a sound that's all your own out of the piano. That's the should be the goal of anybody wanting to be a jazz player, or a good church musician too.
Sure,
it's all the same, same instrument.
Sure. Tell me about. Let's talk about melody and the shaping of melody. That's something you focus on a lot. The ability to make a melody more than just notes on a page. The nuance. How do you teach that?
That's a difficult one, but I found the solution to it years ago. Certain things happen technically with a melody. You can move it forward, or you can move it backwards.
Right.
Okay? That's called displacing it, which singers, and they call it like back phrasing.
Right.
Okay. And you can add notes. You can add, grace notes and notes in between, and not enough to disguise the melody, but just enough to make it your own.
Right.
Okay. But people say, well, I don't quite understand that, and they listen to a horn player and someone's playing Moon River or something, and
Right.
That's not what I'm talking about. So what I just discovered this one day. I don't know how it came to me. I think I woke up in the morning, and my favorite singer of all times, next to Barbra Streisand, is Frank Sinatra. And I said, jeepers, like I started listening to all those, especially the Capitol Years
Right,
recordings. And I know what happened. I just gotten a big Sinatra book for a Christmas present from a student.
Yeah.
And all the old Sinatra tunes in it with 4 or 5 CDs.
Right.
And I started listening to it with a different point of view,
Uh-huh.
like about how he phrased and how he
Right.
back phrased and what he did with the words. And I started suggesting to students, listen to Sinatra. Put the book in front of you like the way whoever wrote the tune wrote it, and watch the words go by, and you're going to be amazed. It started working. Then you come in and say, they mark it. He's over here on beat 1, but over here, what's on beat 3 is now in the next measure on beat 2. I said, exactly. So that's one of the first things you learn how to do is change the rhythm and change the phrasing.
Right.
Again, it's got to be something you hear. Sinatra heard all that. He couldn't read music. He just heard it all and phrased it,
Right.
And the words were a different story, but we don't have the words, although Miles always said you should know the lyrics to every song you play.
Sure. Yeah.
So especially, if you're a piano player.
Right.
Very important. A lot of guys never heard the words to half these songs, and the words mean an awful lot, and that's why they are there with the melody. So when someone like Sinatra, who needed the words to sing, he was acting actually when he was doing it. Yeah. So I say to anybody out there, listen to Frank.
Listen to Frank Sinatra.
You listen to Frank and you'll get it.
and Frank's not the only one, of course.
No, but he kind of pioneered. No one sang like that previously.
And displacement, of course. There's other.
Well, the jazz singers, like Sarah Vaughan and Ella, they did the same thing. But
Sure.
Sinatra's easier to listen to. That's why
Right.
I should have qualified that. I'm not saying don't listen to Ella or Joe Williams or anybody else. It's really more complicated. I listen to a horn player sometime, especially when they start scatting in between
Right.
things and doing stuff.
So yeah, melody is critical. That's one interesting thing I remember you telling me is when you start teaching improvisation, which is another thing a lot of people are interested in that follow my work. They're interested in improvisation, and there's a tie-in, isn't there, between melody and when you move to improvisation?
Yeah. Well, the melody, you should always have the melody in your head. Every great player I've ever seen do a clinic, either live or on TV or whatever, or DVDs, they always talk about the melody. They say you never leave the melody. You listen every once in a while to anybody, and you're following the tune, say it's an AABA 32-bar tune, and the bridge changes key. You'll always hear snippets of the melody. You'll here and there, even though then all of a sudden you'll hear a little quote from the melody. They're improvising off of the melody using the harmony of the moment is what they're doing.
Right. And so, so the critical takeaway is when you guys are working on your improvisation for your, and it may not be improvisation, it may be arranging, because some of you may, of course, improvisation is just arranging very fast. It all sort of blurs together. But if you're looking for material for your, maybe it's intros or interludes or whatever, you can go to the melody. And you basically take the melody and just start twisting it. Yeah. Displacing it rhythmically, or working with just changing the melody notes a bit.
Well, the best example of that, going even before Sinatra, is listen to the early Louis Armstrong recordings, which Wynton Marsalis tells everybody to do, which is very important. Half these guys, they didn't use all these complicated chords. They played blues, they played simple tunes, and yet the usual band like Louis' band was like him on trumpet, Peanuts Hucko or someone playing clarinet, and a slide trombone player. And then a rhythm section of some kind, sometimes a tuba back then, or bass. And when they played, even when they played the melody, strutting with some barbecue, and the boom, and the piano, and the clarinet played moving, that's not all written. They're improvising on the spot. And they were using the melody. Yeah, the harmony was there, but these guys didn't care that much about it. They just played off the melody. And it's much easier to listen to than going into the era of Charlie Parker.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, but the principle is exactly the same. Except they didn't use the same tools. The chords were simpler, the tunes were simpler, but the process was exactly the same. All the jazz musicians did over the next few decades is start importing more and more musical material into it from the classical music.
Right.
More dissonance, more complicated chords, more complicated rhythms. They started playing in 7/4 and 5/4 and blah, blah, blah. But it's the same. It's exactly the same as what Louis and the guys did.
So we've touched on a couple things. We talked about, of course, the issue of where do we actually start? You start with ear, and then we talked about voicing and melody. Melody being, I guess you would say it's the critical.
Yeah,
it's just the critical
everything
thing.
starts.
You've actually always said, and this is something else you said. If you were in a place where you really want to move people, in the end of the day, the melody is what's going to do it.
That's it.
I have a book upstairs. I started reading, and I don't know that I completely agree, but she says in this book just bemoaning the death of the melody. She writes how the melody has been overshadowed by harmony and rhythm. Any thought on that? As a jazz musician, we depend a lot on harmony.
Yeah.
But she was sort of probably from the classical era blasting away at jazz a bit because of the dependence on harmony. But in the end of the day, I can see her point.
Yeah, I don't think it's a classic problem. I think there's some bands that tend to do that, and some players that get a kick out of disguising music so bad. Hey, you know what this is? People still do this to me, even in L.A., and I'm listening. And that's yesterday. It's a Beatles tune. I go, what?
They've changed the chords to the
so
point.
much. Why not just write another tune?
Right. Yeah.
you know? So that's not running rampant. It happens, but it's not something that I should say is part of the movement of jazz today as a whole. No. There's always going to be people do what they want to do.
Sure.
Well,
anyway, hopefully that was helpful to some of you. Focus on that melody and work on your ear. And Ted, it's been good to have you.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll
Next time
catch
I
up.
have my flyover between, I'll wave.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think my house is between. Oh, yeah. I don't think it's between Atlanta and L.A. That's the problem.
No.
Atlanta and L.A. is the other way. But we'll talk to you soon. Hopefully that was helpful to you guys, and we'll talk to you later.